What is going on, guys? Pat Damiano here, and in this video, we're going to be answering some Instagram questions. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I will put up an Instagram questions box fairly consistently or fairly often, and I like to answer them on Instagram. I answer as many as I possibly can for the most part, but one of the issues is that I've only got 60 seconds on Instagram in a story to respond, and there are some that need a little bit more explaining. And there are some that I just think are better questions and things I would like to talk about a little bit more. So that's exactly what this is. So I put one up a couple weeks ago, got some really good questions, and I'm going to take about 6 or 7 of the best ones and ones that I would like to expand on and answer them for you here today. Also, before we jump in, if you ever see an Instagram questions box on my Instagram, please throw your question in there. I like to do them consistently. I try and answer as many as I can, and who knows, it might be a really good one that I decide to throw into a YouTube video. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so our first one is a very good question and a very common question. This one comes from Justin Adams 13, and this is how to progressively overload without having to buy more kettlebells. This is also a reason that I like to do the Instagram questions is I get really good questions and insights from them, like that one, which I will then sometimes turn into their complete own video, which I did for this one. I filmed it. I don't know when it's going to be out exactly, before or after this. If it's out already, we'll put it somewhere. But anyway, how to progressively overload with kettlebell. So basically, if you don't know what progressive overload is, it's how do we do a little bit more? How do we increase without just adding more weight, right? When you're in a gym and you have dumbbells and barbells, it's pretty easy. But sometimes it gets a little tricky with the kettlebells. So I have an entire video on this, but let's just kind of go over the Cliff Notes version of it. So simplest way is you could always just add more reps, right? If you're doing a kettlebell press and you do 5 sets of 5, next week you could do 5 sets of 6, then you could do 5 sets of 7, then 8, and so on and so forth. And you can continuously do that to the best of your abilities. It might not go up every single week, but the concept is there. You're doing more reps. But that can also get old a little bit, all right? So just adding more reps nonstop, it might not be something that you want to do. It might get a little boring. So what you can then do is maybe start to throw in some kettlebell complexes, right? So maybe on those presses, they're a little bit easy or comfortable for a set of 5. What if you did 5 rows and then 5 cleans, then you went into your 5 presses? It's kind of exhausting you a little bit more before you go into the presses to make them just a little bit more difficult. Now, another thing we see in this is sometimes we have a few kettlebells and we don't want to get more, but we have kettlebells with a big jump. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a 53-pound kettlebell, you can press for 5 reps pretty comfortably. And then your next weight you have is 70, and it's just too heavy. What you can do is throw that 70 in occasionally for a couple reps. So let's say you can do 5 sets of 5 pretty comfortably with your 53. Maybe at the end of your session, you throw in 1 or 2 sets of 1 rep with that 70. I call this like just start to dabble with the weight. So this is a good way for you to just start to get some feelings and some reps in with this heavier weight. And then maybe eventually over time, you can gradually build into doing 5 sets of 5 with it. Now, the last one I'm going to touch on real quick is playing around with the tempo that we do our reps in. Isometrics, negatives, and the concentric. So without getting too fancy, if you have doing a press, for example, you can press it up slower. You can hold it up overhead after every rep. You can bring it down slow. You can do 1 of those for every rep. You can do 2 of them. You can do all 3 of them. You can work on coming down for 2 seconds. Then the next week you do 3 seconds, and so on and so forth. Play around with your tempos. That's going to be a really good way for you to progressively overload with kettlebells. Obviously, that's not going to work for your swing, clean, and snatch, but for most other exercises, it will. All right, the next one is another very common question I get. So this comes from GRX54559. 50 pounds feels light now. Next, do I get the 60 or the 75? Now, I don't know what exercise he's talking about in here, but I'm just going to kind of go about this a couple different ways and make some assumptions, right? Let's just say this is kettlebell swings, right? 10-pound jump in a kettlebell swing, usually not that much. And this is a question I get a lot because people don't want to buy a bunch of kettlebells. I'll buy every kettlebell I could possibly get my hands on for the most part, but most everyday people aren't going to be doing that. They want 5 kettlebells in their garage and they're pretty good with that. And then maybe every year they'll get 1 more, right? So we want to know which ones I should get without spending too much money. I'm always a big fan of get the heavier one if you're deciding between 2. get the heavier one. You will eventually build into it. So in this case, if 50 pounds is kind of light for a kettlebell swing, I would say just go get the 75. Because the last thing you want to do is get the 60, which on paper might be the right increase. But then in a month or two, that's feeling light. And now you're like, damn, I kind of wish I had that 75. I don't want to spend the money on it. So I always recommend just get the heavier one if you think you can handle it at all. Even if you're doing 3 swings with it, you'll eventually build up to being able to do 5 and 10 and 15 and so on and so forth. So that's always going to be my recommendation when it comes to something like, should I get the next weight or what weight should I get next, is get the heavier one. You'll build into it. And that way you're not building into the lighter one a little too quickly and then being upset that you don't have the heavier one. Now, real quick, it is very dependent on the exercise that they are talking about. If 50 pounds feels pretty light for a press, then I wouldn't necessarily say go 25 pounds up and get the 75. It really depends on the exercise. But just in general, if you're deciding between 2 weights, I say get the heavier one and just build up into it as you start to get stronger. All right, our next one comes from AJ Fenley, and I really like this question so much that I also made its own video on this, but we're going to briefly touch on the main points, and that is any advice on getting out of the gym bro mindset, feeling like you have to hit the big lifts. So let's say you are interested in starting out with kettlebells, you're just kind of switching up your training, functional training, unconventional, whatever it is, and you're concerned that, they don't really involve barbell benching, squatting, and deadlifting, and you feel that you have to hit those, right? So there's really 2 questions that need to be asked in regards to this. Number 1 is, why are you using the big lifts? Are you barbell benching because you want stronger chest, shoulders, and triceps? Because if that's your reasoning behind using it, there's so many other ways you can do that. Dips and weighted dips, push-ups and weighted push-ups, kettlebell pressing, maces, clubs, dumbbell benching, and other tricep work with dumbbells, and so on and so forth. So if you're bench pressing with a barbell with the intention of getting stronger chest, shoulders, and triceps, or stronger just in this pressing motion, there's a lot of different ways to do it. So in that case, you don't really need them, right? You have a lot of people telling you you need them because they're people who bench press 550 pounds. Yeah, then you need a barbell. But for the most part, if you're just looking for the attributes that barbell benching gives you, there's so many other ways you can go about it. On the flip side, the other question, and the more important one, is, do you like barbell benching? If you want to build your chest, shoulders, and triceps to be stronger by using the barbell bench, then by all means, go and use it. So think about those questions. Ask yourself, do you really like to do these exercises? If you do, then keep them in the mix. If you're just using these exercises to build strength and muscle in specific areas of your body, then there are so many other ways that you can go about it. And it's just getting out of that mindset. And my challenge for you would be, take 12 weeks, don't touch a barbell, hammer whatever it is. Let's just call it kettlebells, sandbags, and dumbbells. Hammer those like crazy for 12 weeks. Throw a mace or club in there and just see how you feel after. You might notice that your barbell lifts are a little bit better. Maybe they're the same or a tiny bit worse, and you might be fine with that. You might have had more fun. You might be feeling better, whatever. The best way is to just test it, try it out, see how you like it. Okay, I like this question. This was, what do you make of the Pavel Tsatsouline style only swings and get-ups routine? So if you were unfamiliar with Pavel Tsatsouline, he's the godfather of kettlebells, whatever you want to call it. He essentially brought them to the US, and he has a program called Simple and Sinister. I don't know the specifics on it, but I know it is a protocol of just building up your swings, kettlebell swings, and building up your Turkish get-ups. The entire program focuses on those 2 exercises, and that's it. I have 2 thoughts on this. From a physical standpoint, I think it's not a bad idea. It's going to keep your workouts very simple. You're going to hit on a lot of parts. There are obviously some holes in there, but for 2 exercises, those 2 are going to hit on a lot of factors: strength, stability, building muscle, power, athleticism, mobility, and so on and so forth. So on paper, it's pretty good, actually. You're going to get a lot out of that. You're going to build a lot, and you're just going to be focusing heavily on 2 exercises. So you're going to build a lot of strength, and for certain people, you're going to build a lot of confidence by consistently going up in them. And it's going to be challenging. So that's just something to keep in mind. So on paper, I think it's a great idea to do something like that, and I think it's a program that has some merit. However, doing a program that only involves 2 exercises, for me, and good chances for you, sounds boring as f***. So that's something to keep in mind. There's a good chance that if you don't know me, let's just say that. If you know me, you know my philosophy on training. And that is, at the end of the day, the only thing that I really care about is, are you enjoying it? Because that's how you're only going to do it. That's the only way you're going to do it consistently. So if you're not enticed or excited by a program that involves 2 freaking exercises, then do not do it, because you need to stay consistent with something. You need to enjoy it to continuously do it. So there's 2 very aggressive sides of this coin here of, yes, this will probably work. It'll be a pretty effective program and you'll get strong and powerful and hit a bunch of different things at the same time, but it will also be very, very boring. So in regards to something like this, it is a personal preference. It is how your personality is when it comes to your workouts. There are some people that say 2 exercises, they're going to work. It's going to keep my training simple. Awesome. I love it. And there's people like me that say 2 exercises forever. No way. So it's very dependent on you. From a physical standpoint, I say yes, go for it. From a mental standpoint, it is very dependent on you. All right, next one comes from Lance_Pace. Coaching cues on getting athletes to brace the midsection during swings. Awesome. I really like answering this one on Instagram, actually. So basically, how do we get people to keep their core tight and things along those lines when doing swings? And I'm going to use this as kind of like an overarching theme. And I'm not accusing him of doing this. I'm just kind of explaining my thoughts on this process. The best way to do it is by not using cues like brace your midsection, right? And again, I don't know if he's doing it, but I'm just kind of using this as a theme. When I was training back in the day, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, I learned very quickly that some cues that I might want to use just don't make any sense to them. They don't know what flexion and extension means and bracing your midsection and so on and so forth. They don't know what any of that stuff means. So very quickly I realized I had to not dumb things down, but just keep things extremely simple and come up with cues that just made a little bit more sense, right? So for example, when I was teaching kids how to deadlift, instead of telling them to flatten their back, I would stand in front of them and say, show me what's written on your shirt. So they would go from around and back and then say, oh, I need to show him what's written on my shirt. So the concept is there, right? Where we keep things very simple and things that just make a little sense. Now, during that time, I realized that adults also kind of learn that way, and it made me a much better coach training kids. So this is just a long-winded way of saying, try and come up with a cue that's not brace your midsection during a swing, a deadlift, a squat, a press, anything like that. Try and get rid of the trainer jargon for people, because they tend to not really know what it means and they don't really care either. So you've probably heard me say, stick your thumb in your butt to not bash your wrist and forearms with cleans and snatches. Same concept, instead of saying internally rotate your wrist and shoulder on the downswing. So for this specific example, brace your midsection, something I always did with people is give them even if you tell people squeeze your abs really tight, that's pretty simple, but they don't really do it the right way. So something I would use for this is, imagine, I tell people when they're getting set up, imagine I'm going to come up and punch you in the stomach as hard as I possibly can right before you do your deadlift or whatever it is. In this case, it would be a swing, so obviously it's more dynamic. Tell them the entire time they're doing the swing, imagine somebody's punching them or kicking them in the stomach. Most people are going to kind of brace, know how to do that, and know how to, quite frankly, prep for a punch in the stomach. So the overarching theme on something like this, specifically in the swing, imagine I'm going to punch you in the stomach, but just overall is coming up with very simple and straightforward cues without using too much knowledge or trainer jargon for the athlete. All right, so this next one comes from Chris_M Reyes or Mr. Eyes. I'm going to go with M Reyes. Best exercises for JiuJitsu. Again, making a video on this one. But real quick, there's a bunch of different stuff. I mean, kettlebells just in general. Oh, he actually doesn't say kettlebells, but I'm assuming he asked me this question. So he probably means kettlebells. Just kettlebells in general are going to be great, right? Now, the basic ones and very simple ones that you can use just starting out of the gate, if you're not really familiar with kettlebells or you're just started jiu-jitsu and want your training to be geared a little bit more towards that, we're going to go with the kettlebell swing. Very straightforward, pretty obvious on that one. That's great for anybody. Things that'll be a little bit more specific to jiu-jitsu are going to be any sort of windmill variation. So I'm a big fan of the half-kneeling windmill, but you can do this standing windmill. You can do the adductor windmill you may have seen me do, where one leg is out straight to the side. But any sort of windmill variation, it's going to be real good for you to just start moving in some different ways, gaining some mobility and strength deep in the hips, the lower back, the shoulder, stuff that you're going to need for jiu-jitsu. And specifically, the windmill is going to get you moving in a direction and a back flexion. There I am using scientific terms, but it's just going to be getting your body moving in ways that you are probably going to be moving in jiu-jitsu that are usually involuntary. And then last one I'd say is a nice half Turkish getup. You can always just add that in or progress on that and do a full Turkish getup, but doing both. So the half Turkish getup, you're going to be laying down on the ground and basically just kind of shooting up for an underhook if you're familiar with jiu-jitsu at all. It's going to be a really good one. Strengthen your core and just kind of have an exercise that is directly translatable to a movement in jiu-jitsu. So start with those three. I think it's a really good place to start. And then realistically, anything you do with kettlebells is going to be great for the mats. All right, guys, that is a wrap. That's all I got for you today. Those were the best questions that I got last time I did my Instagram questions box, and the questions that I wanted to expand on a little bit more than just 60 seconds in an Instagram story. If you made it this far, I appreciate you sticking around. And when you are ready, you're going to go ahead and click right there and get your next kettlebell video. I'll see you there.
Yeah.